Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are excited that so many of you could join us this evening for Spiritual Ecology and Regenerative Economics. I'm Jason MacArthur, the Events Coordinator for the Public Programs Department of the California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Della Z Duncan and Gopal Dayaneni, and then we'll get right to the talk. Della Z Duncan is the host of the Upstream podcast, an Atlantic Fellow of the Social and Economic Equity at the International Inequalities Institute at the London School of Economics, and is a regenerative economics consultant. Gopal Dayaneni is a co-founder of the Movement Generation Justice and Ecology project, which inspires and engages in transformative action towards the liberation and restoration of land, labor, and culture. He teaches ecological systems thinking at Antioch University in Los Angeles and at San Francisco State University in the Race and Resistance Studies program. And now let me turn it over to Della and Gopal. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this evening. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, California Institute of Integral Studies, for having us. I'm Della.
And I'm Gopal, and we're really excited to be able to be in conversation together. We had a wonderful chance to check in yesterday, and I'm really excited to spend some time together just talking about the moment and how we're taking it all in. We thought we'd start by introducing ourselves with a little bit of story. So Della, I wanted to invite you to share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So I'm calling from Boulder Creek, California. I'm up in the mountains of Santa Cruz County, and right below me is a valley in San Jose, California. And it was there that I lived right after college, and I had my first job after college there. I worked as a rape crisis counselor. And you may wonder, how did I go from being a rape crisis counselor to regenerative economics? But to me, it's clear. I was in training there when I heard what's called the upstream metaphor. This is a metaphor that comes from public health. And the metaphor is that you imagine that you're standing at the bank of a river and you see someone float by who's drowning. So you jump in to pull them to shore, and you look up and you see another person floating down the river drowning. So you jump in to pull them to shore. And pretty soon you look up and you just see all these people floating down the river drowning. And I had first heard this metaphor to show the importance of our prevention work as well as our intervention work. And it was a very touching story, and it was very relevant to the work we were doing. But how it was even more relevant or more touching to me was I had this feeling that the work that we were doing wasn't valued in the economy that we were in as rape crisis counselors. It just felt that we were always competing for ever dwindling funding. We had to beg for donations, which felt like the crumbs off of the tables of the tech companies around us. And it just felt that although our work was very important, it had little value. So I feel that since that moment and that hearing that story, I've been on a journey upstream ever since. So I really resonate with that parable, and just wanted to share it by way of introduction. What about you, Gopal? What's a story that you might use to introduce yourself?
I really love that story because it also explains, like, I'm familiar with your podcast, right? So it's really great to have that connection. In this moment, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and this kind of a story about myself that I think is relevant, is actually a story of right now for me. I happen to live. I don't just happen to. I live in an intentional community of 9 adults and 8 kids. I've been living in this community my entire adult life in what we call Oakland, California, unceded Ohlone territories, right along the Temescal Creek watershed. My kids, I've raised my kids in this community. We're all activists and organizers and educators. And in this moment, the daily practice of how to live together, how to organize together, how to raise your kids together, how to make decisions together, how to navigate change and transition and turbulence, how to build economy, management of home within your own grasp and your own doing is like it's in these moments that I realize how important that is, how that has been so much a part of my life, and that for us, this moment of physical distancing, we're all, acting together and living together and taking care of each other, and are able to just very quickly use all of the skills and lean on the strength of our relationships that we've developed over so many years to actually navigate this well, and to have the additional capacity to then support others in our community, others in the larger community, and um, to address both consequences and the world we want. So I'm really thinking a lot.
Gopal, I seem to have lost my connection in hearing you, so maybe others will have too. So I'll just come in for a moment and just really say that I'm hearing that you're living at home, obviously in quarantine, and experiencing the meaning of economy being the care of the domestic home. So just wanted to echo that meaning of economy. I appreciate you bringing that in.
I have no idea when I disappeared. But I was just sharing a little bit about the fact that I live in an intentional community, and how important those relationships have been in terms of the daily active resilience that we have, and also our ability to then have, by creating an economy that can take care of us, have the additional capacity to support people in the larger community, and and both ways immediate in our neighborhood, but also much larger in terms of social movement interventions. So I was just reflecting on that, but I'm sorry I disappeared. um, but one of the things that we were really grappling with together yesterday, and I want to invite you to reflect on, is I think we're all in a moment of deep reflection and sort of thinking about how are we making meaning of this moment, and what new lessons are we learning for ourselves, and about the world that we're in, and wanted to invite you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. And meaning making, I bet we're all doing that in our own ways. And from where I am, it's all about like the questions. What questions are we asking? And one of the questions that I love to explore relates to Joanna Macy's work. Joanna Macy, the great eco-justice Buddhist philosopher and activist, just turned 91 May 2nd. And she has this idea of the three stories of our time, and she means that our time being a bigger time frame, but not particularly coronavirus time, but I think it's still applicable. And she speaks to that two of those stories that are happening simultaneously are the story of the great unraveling, the unraveling of our systems, whether they're ecological, political, social, etc., as well as the great turning, the turn towards life, the turn towards more life supportive, life sustaining systems. And so one thing that I love to do is do kind of a check-in, kind of a health check-in of these two stories. And I'm finding it really interesting to look for signs and seeds of those stories during this time. In the great unraveling realm, which can also be seen as disaster capitalism, I'm really seeing very concerning things, the increase of domestic violence, for example, and femicide, the fact that Jeff Bezos has made an increase of 24 billion since the beginning of the coronavirus to his fortune, already being the wealthiest person in the world, and just a lot of kind of interesting curtailments of our civil liberties around the world. And then, of course, the disproportionate impact that the coronavirus is having on communities of color, on people in meat packing plants and garment laborers, all of this. And I really resonate with this idea of the coronavirus as an inequality ratchet, that it's ratcheting up wealth and capital and ratcheting down suffering and unease. And then the Great Turning, I also see. And I love the poetry right now and all of the beautiful demonstrations of ecology and ecological systems really flourishing and thriving. And I love that people are turning towards permaculture and gardening and all of that. And it's just, there's a lot of beautiful expression of mutual aid and solidarity and support and all of that. So for me, the question is not which story is true, but for me, it's a question of checking in with the health of each story, and also asking myself, how can I contribute to the Great Turning right now, both personally and systemically? So that's a juicy question that I'm looking at, and also meaning making that I'm having right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. The opportunity to reflect on this, not as a like, people are often asking, is this the end of capitalism, or is this the end of neoliberalism, or this idea that it's somehow going to be one thing or the other, but in fact that the future arrives unevenly, and in fact the conditions that have created this moment are also the conditions that have driven many of us to organize and focus on building resilient, regenerative systems in our communities, whether it's all the battles for energy democracy or the organization of peasants around the peasant food web and regenerative food systems and agroecology versus the industrial food chain. So, and at the same time, of course, that there's disaster collectivism, there's disaster capitalism. I really appreciate how you kind of are forcing us to not choose one or the other. And it's one of the things that I've been noticing also, a similar kind of piece of this, is that I've noticed a lot of people wanting to compare crises, to compare climate change with coronavirus, like how many people are killed by climate change versus coronavirus, or comparing car crashes with coronavirus, or comparing the flu with coronavirus. And instead of comparing crises, I'm really interested, like for me, the meaning to make in this moment is, how do we stop comparing crises and start connecting them? And to see that the pandemic, which literally just means all people, that the pandemic itself is not the crisis, but the emergent consequence of a whole different crisis. And that's also true for climate. The climate change isn't the crisis, it's the emergent consequence of a totally different crisis, which is the erosion of living systems and the destruction of human communities and the exploitation of people and planet, all over at once. The aggregate emergent consequence at the next scale out are these pandemics, these phenomena that are going to impact all of us. And in that, I think there's a lot of value in looking for, and like I find it interesting how all of us are having to grapple with questions of time as a dimension of scale. You know, the 14-day lag effect with coronavirus makes it hard to see what's happening until it's already set in motion. And that's also true with climate change and ecological disruption. Of course, there are acute impacts every day in both cases, but the idea of us being able to kind of tease out these like lessons about how time actually is a dimension of scale, and how our interventions are not about necessarily always about this immediate moment, but about the consequences to come and what has been set in motion before us. And I see that in a whole bunch of realms. That I've been really like grappling with that. The whole notion of flattening the curve is actually about extending the time horizon. That by extending the time horizon, we have the opportunity to actually develop new muscle memory, to learn in a new way, to apply thinking and learning it, you know, to become different, to be different. So those are some of the things that I've been kind of grappling with. And similarly, it's not about thinking that like things will get better or things will get worse. It's about recognizing that the future will arrive unevenly, and how we navigate this moment is about getting organized and being engaged and working with each other.
Yeah, picking up on the theme of time, I really appreciate Movement Generation's work. I know you're a co-founder, and I remember one activity, and I know I just really thank you for all the open curriculum that's available. One of the practices that I've gotten to participate in is looking at the impact of our our life, our ways of living on the planet, and then the lag effect. And I'm wondering if you have any parallels you could make there, or even more ecological thinking or ecological metaphors that you're exploring right now in relation to the coronavirus.
Yeah. The lag effect is a great one, and it's really just the thing about time as a dimension of scale for me. I mean, of course, it's also about exponential growth. So there's a huge lesson in exponential growth here. Like, people are like, we remember, or just a month and a half ago, Donald Trump, as an example, having no understanding of scale and growth, exponential growth, surprisingly. Surprisingly, in the sense of somebody who's been driving exponential growth and ecological erosion. The idea that, like, oh, we just have there's just a few cases, but if you double, if you double every day, you very rapidly end up with a crisis. And the exponential growth in production and consumption of greenhouse gases, the exponential growth in the erosion of living systems, at the same time that our ever increasing exploitation and erosion is happening, we're reducing the resilience of the system to navigate those changes. I think that's one really important lesson. But the other, really, like, for me, this whole idea of, like, you have to really struggle with this idea of, okay, there's a 14-day lag effect between when you, like, what's set in motion, what you're experiencing now, you won't experience till the future, and was set in motion in the past, is exactly how greenhouse gas emissions and climate disruption works. We're only experiencing the radiative forcing of emissions up to 40 years ago, which means everything that's happened in the last 40 years is coming. And so you have to think about that when you think about, like, scale and, just because of the thermal mass of the planet. And I think those kinds of ways of thinking are hard for us to grapple with when we talk about them on such a massive scale as planetary systems, but are much more tangible to people in this moment, where people are trying to explain to each other why it really matters. I think that's really important for me. And I think the other thing that's really important for me is we're in a moment where we have an opportunity to actually talk about the way in which all economies are nested in living systems, that there's no economy without an ecological basis. And it is the erosion of the ecological basis of our management of home that it creates these crises and conditions. And it's also the case that we will only ever experience the living world through the economy. And that's on full display right now. I always say, there's no such thing as a natural disaster. And people are like, what do you mean? Like, an earthquake's a natural disaster. But you only will ever experience an earthquake as it travels through the economy, which is why a 4.5 or 5.0 earthquake in California will rattle our dishes and maybe wake us up in the middle of the night, but isn't going to kill us. But a 5.0 earthquake in Bangladesh could kill 1,000 people. It's because the earthquake itself is going to navigate the economy, and an economy that is unfair will inequitably distribute the consequences of those events. And we are experiencing that right now, and it's on full display. The other thing that I think from an ecological standpoint that's interesting is that the scale of the problem does not dictate the scale of the solutions. That a pandemic, the pandemic we're experiencing, is a planetary scale crisis, but all the strategic points of intervention, both in terms of addressing it and in how we will create the conditions by which we don't keep producing these pandemics, are about reorganization of economic life in communities. Like, the strategic point of intervention is not at the planetary scale, it's at the community scale. It's people taking care of each other. It's people actually thinking thoughtfully about the most vulnerable in their community and caring for them. So I think that's another really important thing for me. And it's like, because our economy is nested in living systems, there has to be feedback between the ecological feedbacks of living systems, and the economic system has to have feedbacks that integrate with those. And if we don't, which we don't currently, like, or at least in Western industrial civilization, it's about throughputs. And so we are ignorant of and ignoring the feedbacks from living systems. And because of that, we keep creating these conditions of pandemics. And when I say pandemic, I don't just mean a virus. I mean all the different kinds of pandemics. The fact that that huge numbers of people are experiencing, all over the world, are experiencing the pandemic of hunger, right? The pandemic of climate disruption, the very slow moving pandemic of mass extinction that you cannot see every day, but is very much a pandemic. So those are some of the things that have been, from an ecological standpoint, that have been sitting with me. And I've been really, because you spend so much of your life like getting to hear people's stories and engage with communities about their own, the work that they're doing. I feel like your podcast is so much about the solutions. I would love to hear what you see as like giving you inspiration right now, and what are the things that you think we could be amplifying and building on in this moment, in particular? Like, what are the opportunities that you see?
Yeah, thank you. I want to pick up on one thing you gave us the etymology behind pandemic, and then you also said economy, and you've also said ecology a couple times. And I love how we have spiritual ecology and regenerative economics in our title. And it made me think of, the root of ecology is the knowing of our home, right? So Satish Kumar, the founder of Schumacher College, he once went to the London School of Economics, and he said, how can you call yourself a school of economics without a department of ecology? Because how can you learn to manage a home without knowledge of your home? So I just love that we have both of those. And so I would say, I just love that our title has both of those, because when I look to systems change, I really find that I love to be in the realm of the shift in consciousness, the paradigm shift. So I'm actually currently working on an episode on debunking the myth of Homo economicus. So really just, who are we as creatures? Who are we as beings? Are we Homo economicus, which is this kind of idea that is taught often in traditional economics classrooms because it's convenient for math and equations, that is a view of humans as rational, self-interested beings. And there's many other views of who we are. Some of them are that we are inherently good. Some of them are that we have a choice for good. And it's, again, less important to me about that, but more an investigation as to who we are as a species. And right now, one of the articles that I've loved is an article by George Monbiot, a journalist in the UK. He has an article called, I think it's called A Zombie Love Story. And he basically says, the horror films got it wrong. In a pandemic, we don't become flesh-eating zombies. We actually become good neighbors. So I am really heartened by the expressions of mutual aid and solidarity and support, and the choices that we have to be more solidaristic, kind, and compassionate. I remember speaking with someone who said they went to the store, there was one more packet of something, and they said that they felt like it was either them or it was like a fight to the death for this item. And they said it was survival of the fittest. And they felt so, and I asked them, I said, why didn't you split it? Like, why didn't you split it in half and give them, it's interesting to look at like how we're viewing who we are as a species and the choices that we have. So I'm looking kind of at that level around like fear and scarcity thinking, abundant thinking, and our relationship with the planet and our relationship with Earth. And with work. I'm also really curious about what's the potential for everyone who's either at home or who's been laid off or who is unemployed. Like, what's the potential for finding what Buddhist economics would say right livelihood, right? So yeah, I'm heartened by the expressions of mutual aid, solidarity, and support, and also for the potential that people have in rethinking and habiting themselves in their work and in their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting that I keep thinking to myself that for every story about people fighting over toilet paper, there's 1,000 untold stories of mutual aid and solidarity and support. And I don't actually think the the stories that do get highlighted in mainstream corporate media about people fighting over toilet paper, or that end up going viral on these industrially mediated data platforms, are actually telling the truth of what's happening. They're actually reinforcing a kind of this radical individualism that isn't actually true to who we are. Even the whole notion of the rational, self-interested person turns out to not actually, the basis of the whole tragedy of the commons thesis turns out to be just made up and not accurate to how people actually self-govern common needed resources. And I think we're seeing so much more of that. And for me, but one thing that I do want to sort of grapple with is the way in which even the framing of pandemic makes us think of ourselves as humanity, which I think there's a value in that and a power in that, but it also obscures in many ways the patterns of power and the flows of capital, and the underlying structures that both make the pandemic possible and also compromise people's capacity to navigate it in healthy and regenerative ways. And people are like, when people ask me what should we do now, it's like, for me, it's like the organizing that we've been doing is still the right organizing. Like building resilient local regenerative food systems, that is the right thing to be doing now, because I think capitalism and the current owners and enclosures of financial wealth have the capacity to navigate the crisis of the financial markets. They'll just print money or give bailouts or whatever. But what they don't know how to navigate is the collapse of the industrial food chain under the weight of ecological erosion, and the way in which the systems that created the problem, corporate concentration, globalization, are now precarious in the face of the crises that they create. And what is actually more resilient and responsive are these local communities, self-organized systems, peasant food systems, energy democracy, community control. So the work that environmental justice and frontline communities, new economy organizers have been doing, folks committed to regenerative economy have been doing, is both the thing that makes us more resilient in this moment, and also is the thing that mitigates the structures that caused the problem in the first place. It's like the stories of peasant farmers in India and in the Philippines and all over the world who are self-organizing to ensure that people get access to food and making, doing relief work, and then experiencing the state repression and militarism and and violence because they are actually acting in the interests of people and communities is I think highlighting that contradiction, because the truth is we're not actually all in the same boat. You brought up Jeff Bezos is a really good example, and I think for us to remember that, and it's like in this moment where we're both focusing on our communities, because that's the strategic point of intervention for care and transformation. It's also important that we do that in the context of recognizing how this is playing out in Africa, where we have very little data, where colonialism, enslavement, and generations of destructive development to accumulate wealth in the hands of Western empires has left Africa extremely vulnerable to this and many other of these kinds of pandemics. I think it's important for us to remember that, and to also remember the incredible organizing that's happening. There's folks in Kenya who are just breaking the law to make sure people get food and running huge risks for it, but doing it because as peasant farmers, they know how to meet people's food needs. The industrial food system is designed to mine for calories and extract wealth from communities through their dependence on food and through the basic need of food. And peasant peasant food webs are based on how do we feed ourselves and each other. And I think we're seeing the value of that and the importance of that in this moment. Yeah, and I wanted to say, I think a lot of people who know me would be like, well, spiritual ecology, that's not Gopal. And I want to say that I want to think of it as spiritful ecology, in the sense of I'm interested in how we are. It's kind of what you said, that it's not just about thinking about what we're going to do or about doing, but about being, about how we are actually
I don't hear you anymore, Gopal. I don't know if something happened there. Oh yes, we've lost your audio, Gopal. But you were, oh, there you go. We're back.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Spiritful ecology.
That keeps, spiritful ecology. Sorry. I live in an intentional community, and so Wi-Fi is one of those things that is in high demand. The internet. Hopefully, we'll be breaking our addiction to that soon. But I was just wanting to reflect on the idea that we do have an opportunity to practice a different way of being, and not just think about what we're going to do. And so for me, that is about recognizing the sacredness of relationships. And I think we see that a lot in everybody's day-to-day. Like I was saying this the other day, it's like most people really intuitively understand that subordinating people's health and well-being to rent is wrong. Like everybody gets that you shouldn't be kicking people out of their homes right now. And hopefully we can expand that to be like, actually, the idea of the way we make sure people have a place to live is by commoditizing a basic need is wrong. We're seeing now that a healthcare system that's based on cost cutting and profit making is not equipped to address actual needs around health. And that's the moment that we're in. That's what we're seeing. And I think that being on full display at the same time that we have been building and remembering the right way to be with each other, it's not about something new, it's about remembering our way forward. I think that's a really important piece of it. Is I think really interesting for me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just want to pick up on something you were saying about the inequity of distributions. Two things I've heard that I resonated with. One of them is reframing shelter in place or the sense of quarantine as a privilege, right? So just remembering those who are unhoused, also those who are not getting the stimulus checks, right? Like there's so much just remember that. And also, I've heard this idea of that we're in the time of the great pause. I don't know if you've heard this, the great pause.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, it's like I hear where it's coming from, and I can see, especially the ecological, right? Like there is a pause in the sky of the airlines overhead. However, it is so not a pause for everyone at all. So just really bringing in that lens of inequality. Thinking into our work and into our investigation. And I also love what you said about spiritful ecology. And yeah, I wanted to know what your view on spiritual ecology is. What that means.
It's interesting that you asked. I think that the whole question of like the pause or the like, we're hearing a lot of like the quote unquote silver linings, and I think it's easy to overstate that. I think there's a useful lesson in the fact that you can actually decide to subordinate the economy to health and well-being, and there will be some positive consequences of that, even beyond saving lives, which is reduced greenhouse gas emissions and reduced poverty. But to suggest that, some of the things that we've heard are things like, that humans are the plague and those kinds of things, which are just, first of all, not all humans are responsible for the situation that we're in. And we have to name colonialism and enslavement and capitalism and industrial throughput systems. I think that's important, but also to recognize that for the vast majority of the time that we've been on the planet and that we've been as we basically are today, we have lived in right relationship with the living systems upon which we depend. And we haven't had a rapacious extractive economy. And we haven't attempted, and that because that economy is rapacious, it demands endless new frontiers of extractivism. And those endless new frontiers of extractivism create new and novel consequences. It's so I think, for me, that's really important. It's interesting, like about just the question of spirit and spiritful. I'm really interested in sacredness, not the sacred, not sacred being the quality of an object, but sacredness being a way of defining relationships, or quality of relationship. I'm interested in relationships. And in the infinite complexity of living systems, that complexity creates both patterns and non-linear emergence. Like, wow, that's amazing. It creates patterns that you can visibly see and make predictions about, and it creates completely unexpected phenomenon. Like in the infinite complexity requires mystery, and mystery demands humility. And so for me, personally, I'm not as interested in the notion of there being some mysterious, I don't need like spirit or like, for me, I don't need something else to demand of me humility and care, because for me, it's like, it's inherent in the infinite complexity. Like you just can't know, and you have to be, and that leads to precaution, and that leads to caring, and that leads to having to value and find meaning in all of the relationships in all of the different ways. And I think for many people, that is what, spirit captures a lot of that idea for folks. And the reason I said spiritful is because I'm interested in it being not about like being about how we practice, and but also how we orient ourselves towards each other and towards our relationships and living systems. And just to say, just going back to the pandemic thing and pandemos, it's like, I just want to name, like, even the word demos to mean people. Like, people itself is a political term, right? Who gets to be people? Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about this in Between the World and Me, this notion of like the term people has always been a political word, has a political connotation. It's like, who gets to legitimately be people, and who don't. Corporations get to legitimately be people right now, and quote unquote, at least as legal fiction. And so I want to extend the notion of personhood to living systems and living thing, and on all our relations, and to recognize that we can't, we are unique. Uniqueness is an important part of diversity, right? The accident of cognition and the opposable digits makes us pretty special. But we're not going to do this without being in a deep and abiding sacred alliance with the microbial life in the soil, and all of the other living systems upon which we are interconnected. And so I think for many people, they would think of that as spiritual, and for me, it's like, it just is. It's just the truth of complexity.
Yeah, thank you. And just picking up on the theme of relationships for a minute, one of my favorite spiritual ecology quotes is Thomas Berry, who said, "The universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects." So that really speaks to what you're saying of our relationship to one another and our relationship to the more than human world, right? As David Aberd would say, the more than human world, not just the non-human world. So yeah, I hear that. And as I think about relationships, the other really deep exploration that comes up for me that really connects with the the story that I shared at the beginning is our relationship with value and our relationship with work. I shared that, as a rape crisis counselor, I had felt that that in the economy of Silicon Valley that I was in, the work that I had didn't have much value. And I'm finding it really juicy and interesting to track what is so-called essential work, who are essential workers, and just the outpouring of appreciation, just the signs and the clapping, just all of that is just very beautiful to me. And also one of my favorite tweets that I've read since the coronavirus is somebody wrote, "I've been homeschooling a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old for 1 hour and 11 minutes. And I've decided teachers deserve $1 million a year." And I say that also because I know you're living in your community with children. You probably can connect with how many folks that I don't have children myself, but I work with so many wonderful folks who are now helping their children with homeschooling, also sharing laptops and Wi-Fi, of course, and just that. Yeah, the difference in work. So I'm talking about parenting work, of course, and care work as work, and the realizing how important that is, and also the essential work. And I've also learned for myself how many retreats I didn't have to travel for. I was going to go to Minnesota for 3 days to do, to be someone interviewing folks for a fellowship panel. We did it online, no problem. Right. So just learning about what work is necessary in person, what work is necessary, what work is essential. And I do love that there's also been an exploration about productivity, because I know that there may feel for some folks a pressure to be productive during this time. And I really want to name that people are experiencing this differently. So if folks are struggling with isolation or mental health issues, that there's no pressure coming from me to change work or value or productivity. However, there's been beautiful explorations on people sharing, whether it's like videos of them and their family making a song, or learning to bake bread, or learning to garden. So just this reframe around productivity and around work and around value is something really juicy to me. So I'm wondering if you've noticed any of that as well in your experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate you lifting all that up. And in particular, given that we have had the definition of work so narrowly defined as your quote unquote productive output in the economy, and the ways that you labor in the economy. And from an ecological standpoint, when we think of all work is generated, all wealth is generated through the work of the living world. That we all take energy from the sun, we convert it into power to do work. And that notion of work, I think we're having an opportunity to experience the wealth of our own work in this, for many of us in this moment, because we're somewhat, some of us are distanced from the extractive nature of work and in the dominant economy. That said, the other thing about sort of this question of what's considered essential work is hopefully people are noticing and seeing that the notion of essential work is disproportionately falling on poor folks of color in the United States. Essential work is folks who are jam-packed at minimum wage in confined animal feed operations or meatpacking plants, or folks who are working in gas stations and grocery stores. The question of who is considered essential and how we do or don't compensate those folks are the farm workers who are exploited every day to put food on the table. I think is also forcing a reckoning around how we value different kinds of labor, including care work, and putting on full display, I think, some of the questions around whose bodies are valued and what kind of, we have an opportunity to actually be in relationship.
We've lost your audio again, Gopal. I can't hear you. I can't hear you at the moment. We'll wait till your audio comes back. But
Oh, you're back.
You're back.
Should go.
Go ahead.
It's good. It cuts me off every time I talk too long.
No, I appreciate what you're saying, and I have seen, yeah, in particularly the protests that I've seen for like the right to work, and that kind of thing, and it's I do have a lot of empathy and compassion for folks who are feeling they're having to choose between making ends meet and paying rent and health, right? And also who are making those decisions. Are people able to make the decision to work or not, or are they being forced from capitalists to go back to work, or the government to go back to work? So I really hear all of that, and it's certainly of concern.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that a lot of the organizing of those demonstrations are, it's really well funded by ideological, super rich right wingers like the DeVos family, and we shouldn't think of them as necessarily authentic populist sentiments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Gopal, like if you're looking towards like invitations for folks, because I love to think about, if as we have theoretical conversations, how do we move towards invitations that people can leave with? And I have a couple, and I would love to ask you as well. But I love to think, when I think about economic systems change, which, and I really want to shout out again Movement Generation and the Just Transition framework and the zine, which is available in both English and Spanish. Phenomenal work. But just thinking about economic systems change and how that happens. And I love one way I love to think about it is Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants, kind of thinking about economic systems change. People often think about the behavioral at the individual level, meaning how, if I simply buy more ethically or consume less, than I'm doing my part. And that is a part of economic system change, but it's not the only. So I want to kind of pick that one and expand and just say, invitations that I'm seeing, well, first of all, in that behavioral individual, I really want to just say, I've appreciated how much people have said, how can you avoid Amazon? How can you support small businesses? I'm one thing that breaks my heart right now is thinking about small businesses, small restaurants, local and independent places that are really struggling. And I'm hoping they're getting the support in terms of loans and all of that. But I also want to call for the community support for those organizations, whether it's buying gift cards or supporting those orgs. And so doing that and trying to avoid Amazon, right, going straight to the suppliers. And then also joining these mutual aid and solidarity support groups that we've talked about. If it's in a formal sense, great. And even if it's not, who might you get to know in your neighborhood? I know I've gotten to know my neighbors much closer during this time because they're pretty much the only folks I see. So there's that piece. And then you asked about the kind of the bigger stories that I'm seeing or the bigger interventions. So to call out the collective outer realm of economic system change, I just want to highlight I'm loving all the discussion on universal basic income globally. The Green New Deal has gotten more attention. Also, universal COVID care and then universal healthcare, right? Like that natural progression. I also saw today, really interestingly, that some places in Europe are saying, let's reopen with no domestic air travel. They're saying, why should we have flights within the same country when we could take a train? So I just want to highlight that. And then the inner realm. And so just to share, the inner realm is that kind of shift in paradigm level. So just to pick up on some things we've said and invite a few ways of thinking, but just to ask folks to think about the value of their labor, to think about the value of supporting a neighbor or of gardening or contributing, just to reevaluate if that feels possible, and also to examine one's relationship with productivity and with the earth, right? I know that a lot of beaches and parks are closed, understandably, for spatial distancing, but I also know that folks have been able to reconnect with nature sounds around them or with gardening, and I think that's beautiful. And then I also love the questions in terms of the inner self piece. I love the question of like, what new habits are you developing? What are you learning about yourself during quarantine? What are the things you can ask for help for? I've just seen a lot of folks asking for help receiving help, and a lot of that. So I just wanted to offer those different ways of thinking through economic systems change by way of inviting folks listening to make sense of it in their own lives and go forth with something practical. I'm wondering if you have any invitations in those realms or otherwise.
Yeah, I appreciate how you nested it in all the different scales. I think that's really important. I am really excited about the sort of quiet revolution that's happening. So it's not about, I think there is some really important organizing that's happening, which my number one invitation would be to get organized, to get engaged, not just by yourself, but with organizations in your community that have been fighting around ending rent and protecting people that are addressing increasing policing in among houseless folks, that are working on mutual aid. And the thing about mutual aid is it's not about charity. It's about recognizing that your needs, everybody has needs, and everybody has something to contribute, and we can self-organize to ensure that everybody's needs get met together. And I think that's really important. But I think there's also this quiet revolution happening where people are actually able to realize their deeper values, their interest in children around them, and that people want to care for the most vulnerable in their community. They want to care for the elders in their community. They are looking out for each other. We are looking for ways of doing that, and to reconnect with soil, and to and all of it. So, and I think those two things can go really well together, that we can find ways to regenerate our own capacities by being in right relationship with each other in living systems. And that motivates us to codify that in systems change, whether that's in changes in law and policy, or whether that's in oppositional organizing against the problem, against the kind of disaster capitalism that's happening, but also in creating on a more permanent basis the solutions that we're finding in our lives right now around mutual care and cooperation and looking out for each other, and supporting local small businesses, paying it for, you're not going to get your hair cut for a while, but if you want to pay it forward, you can actually support somebody by, giving them the money up front. All that kind of stuff, if you have the capacity to do it, is something we can hold on to for the future, that we don't have to give up when shelter in place ends, or when the pandemic, when we perceive the pandemic to have passed, because it's only just one vector of the larger transition that we're in.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of a story that I heard when I was doing a research into universal basic income. I heard this story, I don't know where it is, but a story of a local government where the local government was having some budget constraints. And so instead of laying off a few of the workers, they gave everyone furlough, right? So I think they went down to 4 days a week. And at first, all the workers thought, this is horrible because it meant less pay. They were like, why would we do this? We don't want this. This will be terrible. But they all adapted, whether that was changing their eating out patterns, or going on vacation a little more locally, or perhaps cooking at home more often. And what ended up happening was folks started to reconnect with their children more, learn to play the guitar, pick up hobbies that they hadn't yet, or garden more. And so there was actually, when the government decided to return to the full work week, the people said no. So just to restate that quiet revolution that you named, I thought that was beautiful. And it also made me want to share something you also said. There's a movement called Share My Check, and it's resource generations work, I believe, and that's about again, for those who can, to share their stimulus check with those who may have not received it, or who maybe need more than is being given, understandably. So wanted to share that Share My Check as a resource. And I also just, before we go into Q&A, just want to go back to this theme that you and I have both had about not just doing, but being, and being the new economy, or the regenerative economy, whatever frame we want to use. I love to think about the economy not something as outside of us, not something abstract or that's only for the economists, but something that we actually co-create all the time. And so this is how, I drop in the question of the great turning. How can I turn towards life in every moment of every day, in every way of being, in those, as I said, the Ken Wilber 4 quadrants, in my ways of thinking about myself and my relationship with the planet, my habits, my ways of consuming, of working, and then also in my organizing or in my contributions for larger systems change work. So how can we contribute and embody that new economy we wish to see in everything that we do and in every moment? So yeah, beautiful to restate that right now, a huge invitation for how can we embody that new economy in our organizing and in our daily lives and in our ways of thinking and our reconnection with values. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is, yeah, I was really appreciating the synergy. Just really quickly, I do want to complicate a little bit the universal basic income for me, because like I see why, like we absolutely need to deal with reparations, which is not simply amends for past harm, but a remaking of our relationships so that the harm never happens again. And we do need massive redistribution of wealth from the, from where it is enclosed to where to ensure that people have access to it. But more than something like a universal basic income, I am much more interested in how do we reorganize towards commons, towards those resources which we all depend upon in order to create productive, dignified, and ecologically sustainable livelihoods in communities. So that it's not just about we get a share of the extracted wealth that we then get to spend in an extractive economy, but that we are actually in control of our labor through voluntary cooperation to actually meet our needs. And we do so in a way that sustains the resources which we depend upon, whether that is land or seed or each other, sustainably over generations. And I think sometimes we think of the universal basic income simply as a mechanism of redistribution, but I think it has the danger of also becoming a re-entrenchment of the assumption that we actually have to financialize every aspect of the livable world. And finance is just financial capital is just a degraded form of clean air, healthy soil, fresh water, and our time. And so taking back control of those things, I think, is key. So yeah, that was just a
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think for me, where I come at it is more of the work angle and just thinking about if people, decouple their productivity from their labor, what does it allow them to do? And it comes from more my wish for just everyone to be able to contribute to this time and the world in ways that they wish. So it's both.
And I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. It sounds like it's about time for us to go into some Q&A.
Beautiful.
And I think folks are throwing questions into the
I see that here. Okay, do you see where the questions are, Gopal? I see them.
I do, and I opened it up, and now I'm going to move it so I can read them. Hold on. I keep looking down because I'm trying to put it on my screen here. There we go.
Okay. How does the reality that Earth is a living, sentient being inform regenerative economics? Wow, what a beautiful question. For me, what comes up around that is, as I mentioned, there's these assumptions or unexplored beliefs within traditional economic thinking, and one of which is that the Earth is a resource for our exploitation and use. And when we approach economics in a spiritual ecology mindset, where we see the Earth as a living being, often called Gaia, and that all the other beings in Earth or on Earth are also living beings, living sentient beings, then we see that we're in relation to them. So then it completely changes our sense of use, and instead it's relationships, right? So I think it would, to me, it would really cultivate this sense of sacredness in all that we do. Absolutely. So I would say in regenerative economics, the mindset shift would be to see the earth as a living being, and that would inform the ways in which we meet our needs. And that the economy then is not just for the meeting of human needs, but the meeting of human needs and the meeting of the planetary needs and the thriving of all beings. That is the new goal of the economy in regenerative economics.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the purpose of economy needs to be social and ecological well-being. And for that to happen, we have to have a different culture and cosmology than the culture and cosmology of Western industrial capitalism. And that has to be predicated on sacredness and caring. And I think that's for me at the heart of it. And if we do not subordinate economy to the governing, if we do not subordinate the economy to the feedback loops and processes and metabolism of living systems, our economy will collapse. That's just, that's just a reality. You cannot extract from a finite system faster than its capacity to regenerate and get away with it. Let's see, who else?
I think the second question, so it might be something you might be able to answer around the question is, what are some useful models for communities to look at for bringing people together and for making sure the folks who need it most have access to it? Wondering if you have any examples.
Yeah, so first I would say that the examples are everywhere all around us. And I think one of the sort of the tricks for us is to actually notice them and see them and amplify them. We see, like, it's about looking for where there's cooperation and caring. That said, I think there are lots of folks organizing this at scale. We've seen in like large scale mutual aid systems among peasant farmers in the Philippines, in Kenya, in India, where people are organizing themselves to ensure that both their needs are met and the needs in their community, and are prioritizing those most vulnerable. If you engage with the disability justice community, the recognition that if we organize around ensuring the needs of those who are most excluded and whose needs are least met by the existing systems and structures, if we prioritize those needs, everybody benefits. Everybody gets their needs met better. Another example, a translocal example in the US is something called the Seed Commons, which is a federation of revolving loan funds that are creating commons of capital for worker and community-owned cooperatives to access, to be able to create community and worker-owned cooperatives, and at the same time use those community institutions to generate wealth in the community that stays in the community through these self-governed revolving loan funds that are essentially like seed libraries, except instead of seed, they revolve they share capital. And you see just many examples of this. You see this among undocumented communities of high levels of self-organized ways of people getting their needs met who are radically excluded from the dominant economy, and these mutual aid systems. In fact, there's a new like alliance of mutual aid networks that are sharing resources and tools on how to develop your own in this moment, but also building on the wisdom of Occupy Sandy and other just recovery efforts that have happened out of the environmental and climate justice movement. And yeah, and
we seem to have lost your audio again, Gopal. Can you hear me, Gopal? I can't hear you. I'll pick up for a moment. And yeah, and also just I'll add,
Looks like
in
I'm,
addition to
oh,
what you shared, that folks can look up mutual aid and solidarity networks. There's several boards and groups that are forming during this time. And then I'll also share just in general, anytime we see participatory governance or participatory budgeting, I just want to get to that point this person is asking about folks who need it most, how they are involved. And just, yeah, because I think there can be really good intentions for, let's say, NGOs or governments to give aid to folks who need it most, but how do we make sure that those folks are actually the ones making the decisions? So participatory governance, participatory budgeting, and then I'll also plug the idea of the multi-stakeholder co-op is another one of my favorites, where a cooperative is already more democratic and can often be either consumer cooperative or worker cooperative, but a multi-stakeholder cooperative, or just simply using a multi-stakeholder approach, just brings in more lenses and more voices to an issue or topic. So just wanted to share this. Did you have more that you wanted to add on that point?
no, I realized that my audio cut out again, but I was just encouraging folks to check out the Climate Justice Alliance and Grassroots Global Justice Alliance resources. But I really appreciate you bringing up all of the diverse ways in which cooperation can happen. I think that's really important. I mean, there's really simple things like local currency is another really simple, and you don't even need local currency. Like local bookstores, for example, in the Bay Area, just have a stamp. And they stamp your currency, and then that's added value when you use them in local, local businesses. Those short chain, known chain web of relations are way more resilient than the long chain, anonymous systems of a globalized industrial throughput processes. And just want to remind folks that that social inequity is a form of ecological imbalance and will inherently result in ecological erosion. So as much as you want, like, I think if your spiritual ecology wants to value the earth system as its own living sentient being, it has to also recognize that the inequity in our relationships with each other is an affront to that consciousness and integrity. So I just wanted to lift that up as sort of my.
Thank you, Gopal. That's one of my favorite favorite things that I've heard you say before. I really appreciate that. So I'm glad you brought that in. In this next question, the question is, how can the conscious use of technology be applied to regenerative economics? And I can take a stab first. One thing that comes to mind that I have to name, because I went to Schumacher College, named after E.F. Schumacher. In his book, Small is Beautiful, he has a chapter on appropriate technology. And that was a time when I really appreciated this framing of how are we in service to technology, or should technology serve us? So for me, a conscious use of technology is, when does technology serve human and planetary flourishing? So I often think about that, and there are many ways that I can even use, let's say, a platform such as Facebook for that, of course, to support regenerative economics, such as sharing my podcast. However, part of the conscious use of technology, to also remind us, is about the ownership. Who owns that technology? So of course, when it comes to Facebook, it's a more challenging question. But in general, how can we have more commons ownership, or more shared ability to build technology, smaller scale technology, and also, yeah, just the ownership piece. Just again highlighting another great model, platform cooperatives instead of a platform such as Uber or Airbnb. What if it were those who brought the value, those who are bringing their homes or their cars? What if they were the ones making the decisions? That would be a platform cooperative alternative. So I just want to say that this question, beautiful question about the conscious use of technology, is our relationship to it, but also the systemic ownership question.
Yeah, so I end up working a lot on technology, and I would love to direct people to the ETC group, etc. group. It's etcgroup.org. I do a lot of work with etc. And it actually stands for, the E is erosion, technology, and corporate concentration, ETC. And we look at the relationship between technologies, corporate concentration, and social and ecological erosion. So first thing I want to say is we should not think of technology as a tool or tools to solve problems. Technologies are complex relationships of resources and power over time, and they represent social processes. And understanding, and that's ownership is absolutely one huge part of that. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. But it also is about how, like, the whole notion of appropriate technology is about who develops it, how it is governed, who decides that we need a technology, how does it change our relationships to each other and living systems. These are the kinds of complex questions we should be asking ourselves about technology, instead of asking ourselves whether a technology is good or bad, or whether the application that's being proposed is really its true purpose or power. Like, for example, right now, one of the issues I work on is gene drives, the idea of creating virulent genetic modifications in species that are then propagated through the entire wild population. And the purpose, they say, is to eradicate malaria, mosquitoes, so that malaria is driven to, that you drive mosquitoes to extinction so that you can get rid of malaria. But all of the patents are in agriculture, are in, or so, like, under some technologies are inherently problematic, like the idea that we're going to manipulate living systems or create novel life forms. Some technologies claim a purpose that isn't actually what their true purpose is. And any extremely high leverage technology that is developed in a unequal society will almost certainly exacerbate that inequality. And so I think we have to grapple with technology in a much more complicated way than just, is it good or is it bad, or can we use it, can we not use it? And have a more political orientation around technology.
Thank you, Gopal. So I've answered the first two first. So I'll ask this one of you first, Gopal. How can we be the new economy while still working within the system, framework, and architecture of business as usual, the business as usual economy? And when and where would that lead to a paradigm shift?
Well, that's a hard question. So first of all, I want to just say that transition is the process, or is in part the process of navigating contradictions. Like, it's not enough to just have a vision of the world you want. You've got to figure out how to get there from here. And that does require us navigating contradictions. And to do that, you have to have a finely tuned moral compass, and you need to do that every day. At the same time, I think the future does arrive unevenly. Like, I live in an intentional community in a cooperative fashion. Movement Generation is a collective and is a democratically run organization. The dojo that I train at is a 100% sliding scale nonprofit that's collectively organized. Like, that's not because I'm like special. It's because I'm trying to figure out how on a daily basis I can practice living into a different way of being with folks. At the same time, I work for nonprofits that function off the table scraps of the capital class. So and I'm going to the grocery store to buy food. I understand that I'm navigating contradictions, but I'm looking for opportunities in my daily life and in as many ways possible to live into cooperation and caring, and to practice that in different ways. And I do think that everything we need is actually here right now. We just haven't. The ripeness of the moment isn't there for us to put it all together necessarily in this moment, and we don't know when that's going to be. But we have to act every day as if it could be that moment, or it is that moment. It's the thing is, like, I don't have any time for hope, nor am I interested in indulging in the comfort of desperation or disillusionment, because I'm more interested in the very, very hard daily work of taking action and getting organized without even ever knowing whether it's going to add up. because it is the only way to find out. So I'd rather struggle into an uncertain future than throw my hands in the air at what I know isn't working for the vast majority of people on the planet. That would be my take. What about you?
Yeah, when I think about this question, how do we sometimes work within the business as usual framework, but how could that still lead to a paradigm shift? Sometimes I work as a livelihood coach, and I work with people in different places, some of which are people leaving an extractive or exploitative profession and wanting to do something new, some of which are doing a slow fade, and some of which are actually wanting to change something from within, change an organization or a company that they feel isn't providing health and well-being for people on the planet, and they actually do choose to stay within that company or organization. So just to say that there are some folks who do try to work within a corporation to change it. And one thing that I like to do is I like to think about capitalism kind of as like a jigsaw puzzle or an animal with like different pieces, and that we can address the different pieces or holistically, both and I think about, there's the private ownership of capital, right? That's one of the elements that one could address within a business as usual architecture. There's the growth imperative, right? And there's so much beautiful work right now on degrowth and on, Kate Rayworth's idea of like being growth agnostic, like just rethinking growth and the growth imperative. Then we have the exploration of value and work, and that we've been talking about. And then there's this idea of an industry being extractive or exploitative. The Karl Marx idea of primitive accumulation, and how the industry started from either exploitation or enslavement or destruction of natural system. And then there's also the idea that it's non-democratic, that a corporation, a company is inherently non-democratic. So within that architecture, I think that one could choose to work within it to change any and all of those elements. And that in doing so, that would lead to a paradigm shift, both within oneself and within others. So just want to affirm that some folks do choose to work within that. And yeah, so just wanted to add that. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
No, I think there's also what that made me think about is, what are the opportunities do we have as we're working in that way to provoke new crises for capitalism and the accumulation of wealth and power has really perfected the art of navigating the contradictions it creates creating like disaster capitalism is like, oh, well, we've created all these disasters. Now we have to figure out a way to navigate them well towards our own ends. And we should get in the practice of trying to provoke the crises on our terms. And I think our best allies in that is the rest of the living world, and the ecological uprising that we're in the middle of as a moment where we're either on the side of living systems, or we're going down with the ignorance of them.
Yeah, and related to that, I just want to share that name, The Great Unraveling, actually comes from systems theorist David Korten, who the reason why it's called The Great Unraveling is because the idea is that in looking at ecological systems, they don't just fall over and die, they unravel, right? So how are we seeing unraveling? So as you're saying, how do we encourage the death of what's destructive or harmful or not helpful, right? And the birth simultaneously, and the turn towards life-giving systems, right? So
yeah, and from an ecological standpoint, instead of talking about crisis, we can talk about disturbance that creates healthy succession. Like, what are the disturbances that are going to create opportunities for a new kind of succession? Because economies collapse and empires crumble, but ecosystems only ever change. And and crumbling empires and collapsing economies are unpleasant, but it may be it's going to be a part of that transition. It's going to be a bit of everything all at once, and we're just going to have to learn to navigate that.
When you said that, I wondered, aren't we too a part of ecosystems? So can we ever look towards something as a collapse, or does it actually always change? you know.
Yeah, and the more we feel attached to you know, to the economy the way it looks now, the more alienated we become from the living systems that are calling on us to change with them.
Mm.
And resilience is not just about bouncing back to what you were. Resilience is about the latitude and capacity to accommodate change and disturbance and still maintain core identity and function. So I think in the spirit of resilience, which is where I started, it's like, for me, it is about actually looking to and realigning with the rhythms of living systems in how we organize our economy and our relationships to each other.
Beautiful. So we have one last question. One last question here. The question is, how do we move beyond voluntary charity and mutual aid towards deconstructing the inequality of wealth and power that makes them possible and necessary?
Yeah, that's great. I want to draw, I'll start with just a quick distinction. I want to draw a distinction between mutual aid and charity, because charity is about just helping other people because they're worse off than you, and mutual aid is about self-governance. And I'm fond of saying that the only effective way to be ungovernable is to effectively self-govern. And the idea of we as communities self-organizing to meet our needs and the needs of those most vulnerable in our communities, in the face of a system that is not designed to meet our needs and is designed to and views people and bodies as disposable, I think is like, there's a way in which that practice is in and of itself the mechanism by which we're confronting and taking on the inequality and wealth and power, and the enclosure of wealth and power. So I think we tend to think of fighting against things and then creating things as two separate activities. And I would argue that we need to create things in ways that provoke a crisis and beg the question, who has the right and capacity to define our economy and govern our communities?
Thank you for that distinction. Very important. And this is a really pertinent question for me, something that I explore a lot, because I am concerned often when there is disaster collectivism that often happens, and the state is either not there or negligent. And sometimes I wish that the state had more ability to provide for needs, right? And I'm appreciative, though simultaneous, for the mutual aid support that's there. And so I'm in an ongoing kind of question around government and like, what is government and what is healthy governance? And just to echo with what you're saying, it's like self-organizing and meeting needs together. It needs to happen at this smaller local scale, but that too is governance, right? So governance is not inherently bad. So governments can support mutual aid, and essentially ought to. And like, I love thinking about like reframing tax in our mind as like our gift to the whole, our gift to the collective. Like, what if it was reframed that way, and then there was a as I said, participatory budget decision-making process, so that money was spent to benefit the whole and the collective, including the more than human beings with whom we share the realm. So I do want to say that question brings up good questions for me around government and the role of government, and particularly right now. And then I also want to share this. I love the second part of the question is the deconstruction of inequality and wealth and power. So how do we do that? And I'm really curious to hear what you have to say, Gopal. And in my realm, the work that I'm in, as I mentioned, is more in this realm of shift in consciousness and paradigms. So I actually am looking right now, as part of the fellowship I'm in the International Inequalities Institute, as to what are the mindsets and ways of thinking that lead to inequality. And what I'm finding is that the sense of a separate self, the sense of a self that is deserving of wealth that the self earned or got, not acknowledging all the other people and beings that supported the wealth generation that one has. And this sense of like somebody as like a Randian hero or a rugged individual. I'm using Ayn Rand's, it's a reference to that, but just this sense that that there are few people who are deserving of all the wealth that they have accumulated. So for me, that mindset is very dangerous and pernicious and has led to such high levels of inequality. And the antidote then would be decolonizing our minds, recognizing privilege, recognizing primitive accumulation, appreciating the care work, the work of the living earth that has given us what we want, and revaluing that. And then, of course, redistribution, of course, of power and of wealth. But I do look at it from that shift in consciousness perspective and hoping for that more collective, more solidaristic view on our interconnectedness of humanity.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And I want to name that, like, that our cultures and cosmologies, like our worldview, the radical individualism, the consumerism, the white supremacy, that helps us make sense of the existing relationships of power in the economy and justify them. And so I think there is a dynamic relationship between both like changing how we live and act and organize ourselves does change the way we think and view and even talk about ourselves, and all of those things are in a dynamic relationship. It's like I like to say that if you want to, in order to liberate the soil from the physical concrete that paves over its life, you have to liberate your imagination from the cognitive concrete. And the interesting thing is, if you take a sledgehammer to the physical concrete, it cracks the cognitive concrete. But you can't take a sledgehammer to the physical concrete until you can actually see yourself doing it first in your imagination. And that's true about all of this, right? It's like, you know, even our language, like the languages born out of sedentary agriculture are by and large more object-based than relationship-based, and land-based indigenous languages are more relationship-based than object-based. We use machines as metaphors for life. And it used to be that life was the metaphor for everything, and now machines are the metaphor for life. We talk about DNA as code and minds as wired. And so everything from the metaphors we use to the way we center objects versus relationships are an important, are internalized and then play out in our bodies. And if we can change the way we act in our bodies, we'll be able to live those new metaphors as well. So I just want to speak to the dynamic relationship between those two things that you were naming.
Beautiful. So yeah, may we imagine right now what's possible, and may we break the concrete of our minds, and also the productivity piece, and the rent is necessary for living needs, all of those. So many connections, and may we embody the new economy we wish to see now and as we go forth from quarantine, whatever that looks like.
And let's ask ourselves every day the question, what does it look like to subordinate economic activity to the health and well-being of each other and the living world around us? If that is the true north of our decisions in our daily lives and in how we design economic activity, we will remember our way into creating commons and right relationship and sacredness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gopal.
Yeah,
this has been
thank
really lovely.
you. And I think now's our time to invite Jason back to join us.
Yes. Welcome back, Jason.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
That was wonderful. So enlightening. It's just a pleasure to listen to you both.
Yeah, I'm sorry I cut out so many times.
Oh no, that's fine. It was just worked so naturally. Yeah. Well, have a good night.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you all viewers for joining us tonight. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming events. We're announcing new ones every day, and our next event will be Healing Collective Trauma, an online conversation with Thomas Hubel and Brian Swim this Saturday, May 9th. We have posted the link in the chat if you want to learn more. And this conversation was recorded tonight. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it can be found right here on the same link on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'll also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and good night.